Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have a subscriber submission. I also have a couple of other terrifying Dogman encounters to share with you. Before we get into today's upload, I've got a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3. The audiobook version, written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny, is available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those books are in the description as well. Now, I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload is from a subscriber. Apparently, this person... their aunt listens to the channel. The aunt wanted this person to share their encounter with us. So, being the good nephew, he decided he was going to, reluctantly. But because I honor anonymity, he decided he was going to. So, here goes. Here it goes. This took place back in fall of 2002. I was leaving a friend's house about 1 a.m, traveling east side on the I-80 in New Jersey. There was no one traveling on the eastbound side. Just before I approached my exit, I saw something lying across the road. At first I thought it was a bear, but no, it was too thin. So I slowed to a crawl with my high beams, approaching the object slowly. To my dismay, I was having difficulty trying to distinguish what I was staring at. As I pulled my car slowly over, I noticed this animal had the head of a wolf/hyena. The head was tilted back, looking at the sky. The tongue was hanging out of its mouth with huge canines. I mean, this thing was jacked. Its body was a mixture of a human and a dog. Whatever this thing was, it was pure muscle. The ears were pointed with tufts at the end. As I scanned down just below the chest, it looked like it was shot or hit by something. There was blood and fur all over the curb and road. I was completely petrified. I've experienced some scary things in my life, but this was at a whole new level. As I looked at the thing, thoughts were racing through my mind. I was not about to get out of the car. I had a distinct feeling it was playing possum with me. The fur or hair was short. It was not a pleasant sight. I thought to myself, whatever shot or hit this thing was probably in the tree line watching me. I was not about to stick around and find out. I slammed on the gas and took off. When I got to my apartment, I checked all the windows to make sure they were locked. I truly felt as though someone or something had followed me home. The next day, I went to work and shared my experience with some close coworkers. I was ridiculed about the entire event. I learned my lesson to keep my mouth shut unless it's someone that is open to this type of event. At the end of my workday, I decided to take the same route home. I saw no evidence of this creature. I mean, there was no blood or fur anywhere. The entire area was clean. The road and curbside were dirty with mud and other debris. Please keep in mind my cell phone was the cheapest one at the time with no camera. I would say about a month later, after my experience, my sister had her own. She said it was bring your parent to school day. The usual parent steps up and shares their job, career. My sister kind of drowned it out with the usual policeman, fireman, lawyer, etc. One parent stepped forward wearing a white lab coat, carrying a medium-sized cage covered with a white sheet. He announced that he was a scientist that worked with genes and splicing, mixing DNA. He said he brought a sample of his work. He lifted the sheet, and to my sister's surprise, it was a giant grasshopper the size of a medium dog. She said the thing was hideous, and the class fell silent. A few months after that, my parents were waiting for me outside of my job, and they felt like they were being watched. As they turned around, they saw these mechanical birds with red glowing eyes. My mom said they had to have been the size of a vulture. These things were just perched in a tree facing the parking lot. As summer rolled around, a friend of mine was willing to do some work on my car, so I picked up the parts and headed over to his house. After we worked on the car, we headed to this haunted bridge off of Clinton Road. When we pulled up, we saw a black Lincoln Continental parked in a cove with a fishing pole sticking out of the rear passenger window. The place was beautiful, completely serene, with birds singing, lots of trees, and we parked on the famous haunted bridge. Supposedly, in the 60s, kids were racing and ended up crashing the car upside down in the river. The sad thing is one of the kids drowned. The story is, if you clear out your car of any change and flip a coin over the bridge, it will end up back in your car. So we did just that, and nothing happened. We looked at each other and just laughed. It was a beautiful day, probably at least high 60s, low 70s, some clouds. As we were joking around, taking in the scenery, we heard this crushing sound like a bulldozer crashing through the forest. It was pitch black in the forest to our left, which the river cut through. I looked at him, and he looked at me with fear in his eyes. I asked, "Is that a bear?" He said, "I've grown up in this area my entire life. I've hunted, camped, and hiked. I've never heard anything like that before. That is no bear." I kept staring in the area where the noise was coming from, but couldn't see anything. Whatever it was extremely strong, snapping trees like twigs heading toward us. He said, "Let's get the heck out of here." We jumped in the car like it was Scooby-Doo. We didn't say anything to each other on the ride back to his house. That's one day I will never forget. Today's second encounter. About a year ago, May of 2020, my parents were going on their annual trip to Florida with my three brothers for the week. My mother asked me if I could go by their house and feed the dogs, or stay and just house sit. Being the daughter I am, I told my mother that I would just stay at their house and save on gas. Throughout the week, at night, I'd bring the two dogs inside and feel safe since my parents lived on somewhat of a back road. Now, my parents' house is surrounded by trees, and there is a thick tree line separating their house from the two neighbors. Well, one night, while I was home alone, I called my best friend Bailey to come over and stay the night. We were going to do what two middle-aged 20-year-old females do when you're alone: play video games, watch movies, TikToks, and drink a little. Well, Bailey and I were in the kitchen around 3 or 4 in the morning, making homemade funnel cakes like the fat asses we were. The dogs kept moving around and staring at the glass kitchen door that led off to the back porch. I asked Bailey to let them out so they could go and chill, and we'd have enough leg room while we were cooking. While we were eating our funnel cakes, we came across a TikTok about making homemade temporary tattoos with a printed picture and perfume. Keep in mind, my parents have about 3.5 acres of land. So there is the family house, my father's 2-door garage workshop, and a large pole barn. Those two buildings are further out by the tree line, so Bailey and I walked out to the workshop, go to my parents' work office. I punch in the code to the garage door. We go inside to the computer and print out each other a picture of Kylo Ren to make a temporary tattoo for each other. Before I go any further, a little side note: my parents have a security camera all around their property, and inside the office is a television above the desk, showing all the live footage from the cameras. So while I was cutting out the tattoo for Bailey, she said, "What is that?" I stopped cutting and look up at the cameras. At first I didn't see anything except for a small figure in front of the pole barn. It looked like it was sniffing at the garage door. I shrugged it off and told her it was probably one of the many stray dogs that roamed around the area. Bailey nudged my arm quickly after I said that and pointed to the screen again. Wanting to prove to her that it was just a stray dog, I stood up and looked closer at the screen. When I did, I saw a figure, but it didn't look like one of the small dogs. This creature was hunched over on all fours. Its arms were super thin and long, but pointing outwards from its chest, kind of like how you'd imagine the bitch from The Exorcist to be when she crawled on all fours. It had no fur, and its skin looked tight on its body. And let me tell you, when my inner bitch went to open the door and look at it, Bailey stopped me right when I grabbed the lock on the door. Looking back at the screen, at the creature, it looked like it was kind of scratching at the door of the pole barn. I immediately said, "What is that?" And the creature turned its head straight at the camera, like it was a scene from The Office. When its head turned, I couldn't make out clear facial features, but it looked like it had a human head with two big glowing eyes. Bailey and I screamed, and it bolted, and I mean bolted off the screen. Clearly freaked out, Bailey and I hugged each other, like that would protect us. Then something smashed against the garage door, not once but twice. Like, you know what it sounds like for someone to smack a garage door from outside with their hand, just like that. I called my grandmother and told her we thought we saw something and to stay on the phone with us until we ran to the house. Once we got to the house, we brought the dogs in, locked every door, and took shots of Crown Royal until we fell asleep. Today's third encounter. Now I'll just say I have no clue what the hell this thing is, but both times I encountered this thing, it was while I was driving. The creature itself is massive, coal-black wolf-looking dog thing with red eye shine. First time I saw it, I was driving home from a late class. Big old hog raced across the road, causing me to slam on my brakes. I avoided a collision, and the pig quickly disappeared into the cornfield on the right side of the road. A second later, this massive canine bounds across the road in hot pursuit and disappeared after it. I've lived my entire life and have never seen anything like that. This is in South Georgia. Now this morning I'm driving through Winder to get to work, and I see what I first thought was railroad reflectors, since I was driving along some tracks. But as I got closer, I see this big black dog thing sitting by the right side of the road, staring in my direction. I wouldn't have gotten a good look at it if the car behind me didn't have those halogen brights on. I slow down since I don't know if it's going to cross the road or just run over the tracks it's sitting beside. It just sat there, staring at us with those weird red eyes. This thing is not small either. Sitting down, it could stare through my car's window. Am I just being paranoid about this big black dog thing? Most dogs at least react to a car heading toward them at night. This thing didn't even bother to move. Today's fourth encounter. I've been reluctant to tell this story to anyone except for my grandma and my sister. I know lots of stories start the same way, with people saying, "I've only told this person or this other person," probably for the sole reason of being ridiculed. Maybe I didn't tell it for that reason, but I feel it's more because of fear and the questioning of the unexplained that it stirs with me when I ponder my encounter. I'll start my encounter now. It was the end of summer in 1996, probably early September. I lived in a medium-sized town in Kansas, closely bordering Missouri. I had gone to a friend's house about 25 miles into Missouri. He owned a large farm, where the closest neighbor would be at least 4 to 5 miles away. We spent the evening watching movies and talking. It was late, around 12:31 in the morning, when I decided to make the trip home. For some reason, I decided to weave the many dirt roads that are scattered throughout this area home instead of a short trip to the highway that leads straight to the town I live. I knew I had to travel slightly south and west and did the zigzagging accordingly. I had just turned onto a dirt road heading west. I had no more than finished cornering when I saw something in the middle of the road ahead, probably 150 yards, just beyond the reach of my headlights. Just a shadow, no alarms yet, though. Out here, you become quite used to seeing things in the road at night, like cows, horses, dogs, deer, and stuff like that. So I proceed slowly, knowing I'm going to have to maneuver around it. As I approach it, I thought to myself, that's a really big dog just standing in the middle of the road. As I closed in, I realized that it was not a dog and no other animal I had ever seen before. I'm not questioning what I'm seeing yet, as it's one of those events where I'm like, what? I've slowed some, but still just not knowing what I'm seeing. I'm close enough that I can see detail, and now I'm shocked. The only way to explain what I saw is to ask if you ever saw the movie American Werewolf in London. When the guy was in the werewolf form, I swear this is what I was seeing. It was narrower, though, and taller, and its hair was red and yellowish. It had the most evil face and mouth, and the mouth was wide, with teeth that were all long and sharp-looking canines. It was the eyes that held my attention. They were blood red, not glowing, just red and pure evil and hate. I stopped immediately and just froze for what seemed like minutes, but I'm sure it was only seconds, staring petrified at it. The thing stands up on its back legs, and its arms are very long, not proportional to its body. And they are more human-looking than animal. I'm terrified, and I have the feeling this thing was waiting there and knew I was coming. I don't know why I was thinking this, but I still believe it's true. I threw my truck into reverse and sped back as fast as I could, and still keeping control. As I slow to make the corner, I look ahead, and it hasn't moved. If it would have been running at me, I think I would have died in terror. All I can add is this is true. I've tried to remember all the details to give a good perspective of what I encountered that night. But if you happen to be driving between southeast Kansas and Missouri, stay in your car and keep driving. And if you see a shape in the road, maybe you should just turn around. Today's fifth encounter. This is an interesting thing that my friend told me. We live in Natick, Mass. There's a wooded area with a portion of it containing an old, fenced-off factory that is relatively near some apartment buildings. The factory is abandoned. Some of my friends who live at the apartment complex went about half a mile into the wooded area for camping. I'll leave out their names. Now, before I go any further, I must say my area has experienced some very weird sounds, although, in my opinion, they're very unwolf-like. They sound like a woman screaming crossed with long dog barks, a very indescribable and terrible sound. They come from various directions, though usually from the apartment area. Much of the camping trip went normal for them. However, at about dusk, they noticed the cry off in the distance. Now they set up their tent and lights, etc., got into their tents. One of them got up in the middle of the night to use the toilet, the outdoors. But when she went outside, she got an overpowering sense of being watched. She got back to the tent and woke her boyfriend to come with her. When they got out, he felt the sense too, but at the time said he didn't bother comforting her. She went to the bathroom, which was propped next to a tree. As she was going, her boyfriend swore he saw, walking away from the campsite through the brush to the right of a tree, a large, about 6.5, 7 foot tall, man-shaped figure covered in grayish fur, sporting wolf-like features and a bushy tail swaying behind it. He was shocked and ran into the tent, leaving his girlfriend, who came running in a moment later after hearing the rustling of the creature. Throughout the night, they and the others who woke during the commotion stayed awake, continuously thinking they heard the cry in the distance. They never encountered it again, but left promptly in the morning. I believe them. However, I think most of the sounds they heard afterward were their freaking imaginations. Today's final encounter. I had an experience about a year ago. I live in southern Ohio, about 40 miles from Cincinnati, and I live on a country road that might be described as well populated. Anyway, I was just heading back to the house from feeding our pet rabbit in our hutch and happened to see a dark figure out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head and I saw a bipedal dog-like creature in the field across the street from us. It just broke cover from a clump of trees in the middle of the field and was running for the forest tree line. It was flying. I don't mean leaving the ground defying gravity, I just mean running relay really fast. I say that had to be brown shaggy fur that was clumping and shedding for summer. It was about March, not traditionally gray like stereotypical wolf man or whatever the hell they are. I wasn't scared, only curious, as also because my mind had not yet caught up with what I was seeing. I also saw that it sometimes went down on all fours to make a really big leap of speed, then it would go bipedal again. When on all fours, it seemed to run like a gorilla, knuckles down and propelling itself on its front legs. It also kind of ran to a side, not straight forward. Like if it was facing you while running, it would kind of go to your left or right. When it got to the wood line, I lost sight of it. I just stood there thinking, what in the bloody hell was that, a coyote on acid? Then my brain processed this image, a 6 to 7 foot tall, hunched over gorilla running, brown shaggy, furred bipedal canine running about 60 miles an hour and yelled, "Get inside! Haven't you ever seen the howling American werewolf in London? Run!" So I did. Even though it was obvious, didn't even notice me. My fight or flight instincts were working, so I ran inside, double-locked the door, and told my parents. My mom didn't believe me, but my dad considered my experience. He's about as skeptical of strange phenomenon as the institutionalized man screaming into a microphone about aliens and how Jesus was coming with them. Well, that's my experience anyway. I think the Wisconsin Bray Road Beast or the Michigan Dogman might be making their way towards the East Coast. Alright guys, there's 6 terrifying encounters. They were freaking creepy as hell, man. Jeez 'em. Really hope you enjoyed them. I may have another upload out tonight. I don't know. For some reason, I've been just doing a lot of research. I've got a stack of encounters. I've been talking to a lot of people about their encounters, and instead of watching YouTube videos after I'm done, I get kind of bored, and I'm looking at my studio saying, yeah, let's put another one out. So who knows, maybe I will and maybe I won't. But with that, I'm going to bid y'all farewell, and I hope you have a good night, guys. Thanks for always listening.